Hey, good morning. Pete, North Las Vegas. Hey, today I thought we'd showcase my old Colt Master. And this is a carbine, 16-inch, heavy barrel. I bought the upper as a Colt conversion. And I also bought the lower separately back in October of 1994. And right after the federal assault weapons ban passed. And on September 12th, 1994, these were the rules. If you had a detachable magazine and you had at least two of the following, that was considered an assault weapon, and you could not assemble a weapon with this criteria. Now, if you already had one, then it was grandfathered and you were fine. And you could pretty much do whatever you wanted with it so long as the lower was prior to this law passing. Now, California also passed their version in 1990, and it was generally referred to as Roberta Ruse, the two clowns that passed the legislation. Anyway, I think the California law, even in 1990, was a little bit more stringent than the federal law. I think California said you couldn't have a folding or telescopic stock at all. You just weren't allowed to have that, period. And then the other features were depending on how many. So anyway, like I said, I bought the complete upper in October 94 and the complete lower in October 94. So let's see why I call this thing the Colt Master. Okay, so the reason I call it the Colt Master is because I bought a complete lower from Bushmaster. And this is the real Bushmaster. This is before the Freedom Arms Group bought out Bushmaster, and they became known as Rim Master or the Bushington. This is the real deal. And on your Colt conversion, they would stamp the caliber on the left side of the receiver. There were some other things they did with the bolt to where you could distinguish which caliber you had. Now, even though they marked this Colt 223, it's actually, that's probably upside down. Yeah, okay. So it's actually a 1 and 9 twist H-bar, and all the Colt conversions came with H-bars back then, so you didn't have a choice about the barrel profile. So anyway, that's kind of basically the Colt Master here. I thought we'd go over each individual feature, and then I'll tell you why I put that Bushmaster on there. Okay, so we'll get into a little bit more about how the law worked back then. You could buy a complete upper with the bayonet lug and the flash hider, and you could buy a lower with the pistol grip and a collapsible stock. But what you could not do was you couldn't put them together after September 12, 1994 for the feds. And like I said, I believe California was 1990. If you did that, you were breaking their unlawful laws. So that's how you were still able to get all the bits and pieces, all the evil features. You just couldn't get a complete rifle that way, and you couldn't piece a complete rifle together that way. So that's how the law worked. So let's start off with, this is aluminum, and it's kind of clone correct, real deal, what they were selling back then. And this is only 3 positions. So there's fully out, there's the next spot, and all the way in. And back then, for some reason, we only needed 3 positions. We didn't need 6. And I mean, am I glad we have 6? Yeah, I guess. But me personally, back when I bought this, I only needed 3. Also, on the retaining ring here for the buffer, this is the old style spanner. You can see it's not a castle nut. So you had to have a spanner wrench to get that tightened up. And then we also had the conspicuous pistol grip, another evil feature. And that is number 2 on this list. And you can see that it does protrude conspicuously beneath the action of the weapon. And then you weren't supposed to have a bayonet lug. couldn't have that. Now that's the most evil, deadliest feature on this rifle, is that bayonet lug. That's terrible. And then the other thing is you could not have a threaded barrel that would accept a flash hider, flash suppressor. Now, the way you got around this is you put a brake on here. You put something on here that wasn't considered a flash hider. So that's how you got around that one. Number 4. So back then you could still have a threaded barrel, you just had to have a brake on it, or put a thread protector on it, or buy something that just didn't have the means. But if you put anything that was identified as a flash hider, now you're breaking the law. Okay, so the only deadly feature that this rifle didn't come with, as far as the upper, was the means to readily attach a grenade launcher, which is number 5. Now, I think there may have been some back and forth on that one, because I think you could still have it so long as it was identified as a flare launcher. Could be wrong about that too. But yeah, back then when I pieced this together, I didn't feel like I needed a great grenade launcher. And to this very day, I still think that I personally don't need a grenade launcher. But would I want to deny you that feature? No. If you want a grenade launcher, put one on there. I don't care. Okay, so back here, this is the first AR that I ever purchased, and it's also a Colt. It's a sporter, and it's a Sear block Colt. For those of you that are familiar with AR platforms, this is what Colt was doing with their lowers back in the 90s. And I bought the sporter that had that. It comes with oversized trigger pins, and it comes with a non-captured front pivot pin. And there's a trigger difference also because of that Sear block, which I'm getting ready to show you. Now, I bought this rifle in '94, and they were still doing it, but I ended up removing the Sear block so I could run a standard M16 bolt carrier. And the Colt conversion that I bought back then, you can see the bottom half of this bolt carrier is missing. And the same thing on my old sporter. And then we'll get to what I did to fix this one over here. So that's the reason I went with the Bushmaster lower, is because I didn't want another lower with a Sear block in it, oversized trigger pins, and a non-captured front pivot pin. And then the other thing is, when they put these Sear blocks in, you had to have a specialized trigger also. You couldn't put a standard mil-spec trigger in there. And I'll show you why. Okay, so the one on the right is the Sear block. And you can see how the left side of the trigger is missing. And that was to give this trigger on the right enough room to slide in beside the Sear block. So not only does the Sear block, oversized trigger pins, non-captured pivot pin, it also takes a proprietary trigger. And then we'll get into why I removed it out of the match target a little bit later on in this video. So that's your main differences on the lower. Okay, so I've mentioned this in a couple other videos. Colt was the only one doing this stuff as far as this Sear block nonsense. And it was not government policy. It wasn't a law. It's just something Colt voluntarily decided to do to help prevent you from putting a drop-in auto sear or converting the rifle to fully automatic. And that's why they made oversized trigger group pins, the Sear block, and nobody else was doing that, which is why I went with the Bushmaster. There's no Sear block in here, It has the correct size 1.54 trigger pins. It has a captured front down or front pivot pin. And you can see right here on the lower where you have your anti-hydraulicing or drain hole drilled. And there's a spring and detent back here that keeps the pin from popping out. Now on my Sporter and the Match Target, those never got machined. You can see there's no hole in that one. And in order to get a more of a quick release to get the two halves apart, I put in a KNS push pin. So there's the main differences on the lowers. Okay, so once again on the Bushmaster, because they weren't playing this Sear block game that Colt was back then, even to this day, I can still put whatever type of trigger I want here, any kind of drop-in modular, and don't have the Sear block nonsense. And I can run any kind of bolt carrier that I want. I don't have to have this specialized Colt bolt carrier. Okay, so when Colt was doing these Sear blocks, there was 3 different versions. There was a blind pin that went in on the left side only, or maybe it was the right side only. There was the style that had 2 of these, a blind pin on the left side and the right side. And then mine also came with a roll pin that goes down the center here. So there's a roll pin that goes in here, and these 2 blind pins on mine. And like I was saying, on some of these rifles, they only came with 1 blind pin, no roll pin. And both of my Colts, when I bought them, came with everything. They came with the full Monty. So I'll show you what I did with the Match Target here. And I've done separate videos on all these before, but I don't think I've ever done one video where I showcased everything. So we'll open up the Match Target over there, and I'll show you what I did out of necessity more than anything else. Okay, so this is the original trigger that came out of the Match Target. And up here, this trigger where it slides along the Sear on the hammer, it got really worn bad. And the trigger pull was terrible. I always got the feeling when I was pulling it, it just wasn't going to work right. So I took some needle files and tried to smooth that out, and took some fine grit and tried to polish it, but there's still a pretty good lip right there that I couldn't get out. And no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't get this trigger feeling and working like it used to when the rifle was new. And I'm not sure why this particular trigger wore out, because my Sporter over there, I have more rounds on that, and it uses the same exact style, the Sear block trigger, and it's fine. So I don't know if I just maybe had a heat treat problem with this from Colt, and that's why it wore out a little quick. But anyway, I just wasn't able to get that polished out and still keep the correct dimension so that I didn't have an unsafe trigger. So I decided that, you know, this needed to be replaced. And as I was saying earlier in the video, these use oversized trigger pins. And they come in at about 0.17, where mil-spec is 0.154. Just about nobody is making a large pin mil-spec type trigger or a drop-in. But I was able to find one from Velocity where he had large pin holes. So the next step was to get the Sear block out. And once the Sear block is installed, you can't get this trigger out. At least I wasn't able to. So I ended up pulling this Sear block out. Like I said, this is the full Monty. It had both blind pins and the roll pin that went down the back to hold it in place. And I was able to get it out of there without any damage. And I'm gonna take some black stainless. I had some other nuts on here where I matched the color up a little bit better. But once I got the Sear block out, I found some screws, and they don't look quite correct. But at least we got the holes plugged up. And I was able to get a new trigger in here. And so that's the main reason I felt like I had to do what I did. I had a guy that commented, because I did a separate video on this, removing a Sear block and getting all this stuff out, these blind pins. And man, he was all upset. You ruined that rifle. No collector's gonna want that rifle. And you should have never removed that Sear block. And I'm trying to explain to him that, you know, I had a trigger problem. And then he came back and said, oh, you could have found another trigger online somewhere. And I'm thinking, yeah, I don't know about that. How easy it would be to find one of these Sear block triggers, or find one that's, you know, in really good shape. And so that argument of his, I didn't think quite held water, but man, he was all upset. And you could tell he's a real Colt aficionado. And so the last comment I made to him was, look, I didn't screw the rifle up. Colt did. Colt did the minute they made this thing by putting a Sear block in there, oversized trigger pins, a non-captured pivot pin, and all the stuff they did on this rifle before it even left the factory floor. I just told him, you know what? I said, Colt screwed it up, not me. So anyway, I think that's all we got today. I mean, I could go on about this for quite a bit longer, but I don't want to get too long-winded on this video. And by removing that Sear block, I also get to run any kind of bolt carrier that I want. You can see that's the full dimension versus what I was showing you earlier in the video. So anyway, yeah, Pete, North Las Vegas, over and out.